The NDIS has an incredible knack of describing in detail how they're going to stab you in the back in such a way that you know that they're expecting to be thanked for it. It's remarkable. Hi, I've crawled out of my shell of safety to have a chat, all because the NDIS is pulling their crazy shit, and nothing gets me talking quite like the NDIS pulling their crazy shit. They have released a new legislation called Getting the NDIS Back on Track. What kind of track? Only they know. It's gotten people talking. It's gotten people angry. People with disabilities, disability advocates, and the crossover between the two. People are not pleased. Partly because it passed despite the amount of pushback, a huge amount of pushback from people in the disability community. And that is a very big feeling of like, shh, 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 shh. We're handling it. People with disabilities, sit down, shh. We'll take care of you. We've got it. We know best. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I went through the bill. I had a look at the changes, and these are my thoughts and feelings, because yes, I do have thoughts and feelings. I've gone through them section by section as they've been laid out in the article on it on the website. They're not in order of section, which really bugged me, but these are how they've ordered it, and these are my feelings on how this could play out. Section 21, separate pathways. When you apply to access the NDIS, the NDIA will consider, decide, and tell you if you have met the disability requirements, early intervention requirements, or both. This change supports the creation of new participant pathways, for example, for participants who will benefit from early intervention. Different ways of accessing and using the NDIS is a good thing. For many people, having some support now may mean they need less support later on. The NDIS's previous all or nothing approach just wasn't realistic. It was like, are you disabled for the rest of your life right now? And some people would say, I don't know. I might just need a little bit of help and then I could get back on track. They're like, no, well, that's not it. So I think having this option, that could be good. And I hope that this change works as intended. Section 24, disability requirements, and Section 25, early intervention requirements. Disability requirements have been updated to clarify that a person should only access the NDIS if they require supports, which are NDIS supports. This makes it clearer when a mainstream system is responsible for providing support. This has the potential to be idealized. In a perfect world, this is great. But the NDIS, which is run by the government, can't place responsibility on meeting the needs on the mainstream system, which is also under the purview of the government, if they are not ensuring that the mainstream system is prepared to support those needs, especially if more people from the NDIS have to access the mainstream system, if are pushed onto the mainstream system or have the NDIS access revoked, which is something to do with what we'll talk about later. The mainstream system could be pushed to capacity. It's one thing to say, that's not the NDIS's responsibility to meet those needs, go to the mainstream system. If the mainstream system isn't prepared to meet those needs, it's passing the buck, really, if you're also not supporting, like the mental health system. The NDIS could say, well, that's a mental health concern, so you need to go through the mental health system. That's not our job. But if the government also isn't providing support to mental health systems, then what are you doing? You're literally, that's just a Scott Morrison, that's not my job situation. Section 19, limit on making new access requests. If you have your status as a participant revoked and request a review of that decision, you cannot make another access request until your review is complete. Reasonable. People just need to be prepared for the NDIA's habit of taking months and months and months to complete reviews, especially if there's a mass forced exodus of people from the NDIS due to these eligibility reassessments, who then want or need to reapply. Section 34, supports for impairments. The NDIS will only fund NDIS supports related to the impairments you meet access for. This sounds reasonable, but it could be a narrow and borderline ignorant view of disability. I mean, many people with disability develop symptoms that aren't directly related to the impairment themselves, but they are instead due to the lifestyle that is caused by the condition. Like my chronic fatigue syndrome, poor circulation isn't directly a thing with chronic fatigue syndrome, but chronic fatigue syndrome has caused me to be in a wheelchair for 10 years. Being in a wheelchair for 10 years has caused me to have poor circulation. If I sought supports for poor circulation under this legislation, would the NDIA oppose it? Because it's not actually a symptom of my disability, even though, like, please show me a person who's been in a wheelchair for 10 years who doesn't have poor circulation. There is room later on in one of the other sections for a kind of a spirit of the law, not letter of the law thing, where they have allowances for this. So I really hope that there is some wriggle room there. Wiggle room, not wriggle room. You could wriggle, I guess. Section 32BA, impairment notices. Participants will receive an impairment notice when they meet access to the NDIS or transition to new framework plans. This will list their impairments in relation to which they met the disability and or early intervention requirements. This is great. This is one of the ones where I was like nodding aggressively. This, like, considering that under the current system, I can't actually find out the disabilities that I'm on the NDIS for. They'll say to you, make sure that anything you ask for is in line with the disabilities you're on the NDIA for, right? So you think, oh man, well, every time I get my plan back, it doesn't list my disabilities. So maybe I'll just call up the NDIA and say, hey, can I just know what disabilities I'm on the NDIS for? And they'll go, no, I can't tell you. But what disabilities do you have me on file for? It says other physical, but no actual listed disabilities. What? Like, I just want to make sure I'm jumping through your hoops. Good. So where's the hoop? Nah. We'll just only tell you if you're wrong. So this one is a welcome change. Section 10, NDIS supports, introduces a definition of NDIS supports that can be funded by the NDIS and declared by the NDIS rules to be NDIS supports. A substitution rule will enable participants to request a substitute support that is not an NDIS support in individual circumstances, so they can claim and use that support. This looks like it could circumvent some of the misuse of funding that there has been on the scheme, which, by the way, is more likely to occur due to providers and plan managers than participants. But this could narrow it down to, this could narrow it down so that, like, if you were using it without being disabled, then the NDIS shouldn't pay for it, which is fair. If it's something where, like, if I wasn't disabled, I would use that service, I shouldn't really be getting that service from the NDIS. That's normal. However, there are some things that I use that a regular person would also use, but I use it in a different way due to my disability. The previous flexibility of the NDIS allowed me to make claims and then provide reasons to make sure, like, are they reasonable and necessary? I was able to claim those, providing essentially a pre-approved list of what disabled people would need is a very narrow view of life with disability. And it doesn't really allow for people with their different experiences to say, well, not every disabled person uses this, but I do in this way. So I'm concerned about that. Section 44, plan management decision. The NDIA can consider changing your plan management type in certain circumstances, including if we think you, your nominee, your plan manager, or a child representative are unlikely to spend your NDIS funds properly relating to NDIS supports in line with your plan. That is an interesting interpretation of their core values of choice and control. In my song, the NDIS song, linked above, I sing, "The NDIS is meant to be all about control and choice. I wish some of that belonged to me. That'd sure be nice." Although I can see the benefit of keeping an eye on the decision makers because that's where the fraud happens, I feel this isn't the correct response. Instead of then, like, taking the decision out of the participants' hands of how they chose to have their management done, why not flag the issue instead? Why not educate them on how it's appropriate to use funds? Why not look into the plan manager and see if there's a pattern of this behavior and suggest to the participant, use a different plan manager, not just you are not permitted to be plan managed anymore. Like, I see there as an issue and there are responses. This isn't the right one. Section 33, total funding amounts, funding component amounts, and funding periods. Plans approved after the law comes into effect will have total funding amounts, funding component amounts, and funding periods. This clarifies the amount of funds available in the plan and how long the funds need to last. Again, I hope there is leniency here. I hope there is wiggle room. This indicates a pressure to spend funding, but previously there's been a cracking down on what we can spend our funding on. People will be navigating a new way of using their plans and their funding, figuring out if their usual supports fit in the new way the scheme is operating. There might be a teething period, and I really hope the NDIA are prepared for this. I'm also concerned about the expectation of spending funding in a certain period of time, and if there will be penalties if that doesn't happen. If somebody says, I need this amount of occupational therapy in my plan, if they don't spend it in that year, the next year will the NDIA be like, you won't get the same amount because you didn't spend it? But what if in that first year they weren't able to find the right OT? The next year, once they've found the right OT, they will be seeing them in the expected amount. But that first year they were struggling to find them, or they didn't use all of their community access funding because they got really sick for a month or two. Will they then have reduced funding because it's use it or lose it? So I hope there's an element of the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. But again, this is the NDIA. Plan variations, section 47A. Specific changes can be made to your plan without needing to create a new one. This seems positive. Changes being added to a plan without changing the entire plan review, without an entire plan review being needed, could streamline the process and means that you get your needs met a lot more quickly because you don't have to wait for the entire thing to be changed. Section 30, information gathering for deciding whether to revoke a participant's status. The NDIA can request specific information or require you to do certain things like undergo an assessment if we are considering revoking your status as a participant. If you do not comply with the request within a reasonable time, the NDIA may revoke your access to the NDIS. This is something that has a lot of people frightened and so much for the NDIS being permanent and you can't get kicked off and we're supporting you for life. Yay! Yeah, we take it all back. Yeah. I am afraid, as I had to fight to get onto the NDIS to begin with, due to the complex and misunderstood nature of chronic illness as a disability. Many of us in regional areas were permitted to have a GP assessment as our way of gaining access to the NDIS because specialists were unavailable, and I'm concerned if our access requirements are going to be reassessed. Anyone with anything rare, or things that are difficult to be understood by the NDIA, will probably be reassessed and questioned. Anyone with anything outside the box will probably get contacted. The upside that they're sort of promoting is that it's going to be based on needs rather than diagnosis. It used to be the NDIS is going to be based on needs, not diagnosis. Please give us your diagnosis. We haven't heard of that, so you're not disabled. This is meant to be about needs, but I have a feeling that people with understandable disability diagnoses are not going to have their needs questioned. If you get me. Section 30A, eligibility reassessment, allows rules to require that certain cohorts undergo an eligibility reassessment in particular circumstances, for example, when children turn 9. The example they give seems reasonable. As a child may have received early intervention access and might not need to have ongoing support if the early intervention built their skills enough. But they don't list any of the other particular circumstances, which is an interesting and concerning omission. Section 45A, Claims and Payments Framework, introduction of a legislative claims and payments framework for the NDIS to provide clarity on how claims should be made. This could be good and could weed out the organisations who are misusing funds. Again, it's almost never the participants who are doing so, it's the organisations. And this is something that has come up, that there are also people who haven't understood how to properly make claims. There needs to be consistency in how that is done. And it often seemed like even the NDIA weren't on the same page as to what they wanted and what they expected. So this seems promising. Section 32K, New Planning Framework. Under the new planning framework, a flexible budget will be determined by a new budget method informed by a support needs assessment. This has potential because it does imply that the NDIA is aware of how things could fluctuate when it comes to disability, but this change is worded so vaguely and in a way that requires so much extra knowledge that I can't have a full opinion of it. It feels like legalese, where they're like, do you agree to the following? And you're like, I can't agree or disagree because you're just speaking over my head on purpose. Section 32L, support needs assessment. Under a new planning framework, participants will undergo a needs assessment which records their whole-of-person disability support needs. The NDIS will fund needs which arise from the impairments in relation to which a participant needs the disability requirements and/or the early intervention requirements. I support a holistic approach to disability, and I think that's a positive thing if that's what they're introducing. I think this will also fill the gaps that I was concerned about previously, where like needs develop from a disability that might not be a part of that disability to begin with. So hopefully that's what this is referring to. However, after doing some reading, it appears that this framework will be replacing the previous reasonable and necessary legislative criteria. So that allowed us as participants to basically say, like, I want to claim for this piece of equipment or this item. I am going to explain how it's reasonable and necessary to my disability. This is taking it out of our hands. And the support needs assessment team will be like, I have decided what is necessary for you and whether it fits into the shopping list of things that disabled people need. Again, it's a taking away of our choice and control. So yeah, a lot of this is concerning because it's kind of backtracking on a lot of promises. The NDIS is about the choice and control of the participant until now it isn't. The NDIS is for life until now it isn't. Even like the Labour Party pledged not to cut the NDIS funds until now they're cutting it. This whole thing is aiming to cut it by 14.4 billion over the next 4 years. And they're saying that it's for the purpose of it being more sustainable and helping people for longer. But like, if you looked at a line of people who wanted food and you're like, I'm going to make sure everyone in line gets fed, and then you shot half of them. Well, yeah, the remaining people are going to get fed. But I don't know if that's the way to do it, Half as many mouths to feed, more food to go around, sure. But I don't think that's how you help people. It's particularly because it's another case of we want to help the disableds. And the disabled people with disabilities are like, yeah, that's not how we shh. But that's not the best way to shh. Yeah, that's a really incorrect way to shh. We're helping you. Sit back and let yourself be helped. I don't think that's the way. I don't think that's it. So yeah, I have thoughts and feelings. ABC Radio Port Macquarie reached out and asked if I had any thoughts and if I wanted to chat, and I said yes and yes. So hopefully I'll be able to get on there and have a bit of a rant, because I do have a lot of thoughts and feelings. All right, that's all for me. This was enough to get me out of my hole and in front of a camera. So yeah, have thoughts and feelings. Share what you feel. Get angry. Get angry with me. Be angry with me. I want people to be angry with me. All right. Bless. I'll see you in the next one, whenever that is. Thank you for listening and for learning with me.